difference in coloration. You've got a white looking portion here and then a darker portion here. Again, maybe just an effect of the light, whatever. We're obviously not going to get a chance to know any more than this. Richard Hoagland claims that this is the same rock in the same picture, which is further away. He thinks it's the same as this object. I can't quite see it myself. I can see some of the similarities to it, perhaps in the height and stuff, but very difficult to say whether these would be two of the same thing. I mean, obviously, if you did have two identical looking rocks, that would be highly suspicious. But there's more to it than this. Again, we've got. I think this is another spirit picture. PIAO 5036. So what are these features here? I mean, is this truly a natural rock? Again, could be a natural rock, but we've got a suggestion here as to what it might be. And well, you know, I'd certainly wouldn't dismiss this out of hand. So we've got equally spaced openings, he thinks there. Well, yeah, I'd certainly say we could see some space in here quite clearly, which seems to be equidistant. Very unusual, and this here also looks a bit unusual, but they don't highlight what that might be. These objects are way off in the distance, so you're right at the getting towards the resolution of the camera. Okay, so we've got this sort of fairly ordinary looking picture, again in black and white. A lot of these images seem to come up in black and white, and I really don't know why. Why can't they just give us the blooming colour of, you know, what is the point of sending up a space probe and then giving all these false colour images for whatever reason? We want to see, as people, what Mars would look like if we were stood on it. That is why you have a visual range spectrum camera on there. You know, you want to see the natural colours, not colour enhanced, not, you know, enhanced to the C infrared signatures of rocks. We want to see the actual colours. But on this particular one, if we look here, it could be a speck of dust on the camera, or could it be a weather balloon? Let's zoom in. Well, could be a speck of dust. But that's about the only thing it could be. What else could it be on Mars? It could be a speck of dust on the camera. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions. Okay, so that's another anomaly there for you to chew on. Now let's look at some more colour issues. And this really, to me, is one of the more important ones. What colour is the sky on Mars? We've touched on this already, I've mentioned it several times. Let's just look at the idea of having, we'll go with NASA, we'll say yes, the sky's red on Mars. Okay, that's what you're showing us, so that's what the truth is. A blue sky on Earth or any other planet is caused by refraction. Red light is bent and scattered less than blue light, so while we see red or yellow coming only from the sun, we see blue coming from all directions. For the sky to be red, blue light would have to be either completely absorbed or reflected, and only red light allowed through. This can actually happen on the Earth. At sunrise and sunset we have red skies because the greater depth of the air ends up completely absorbing the scattering the shorter wavelengths of visible light. To see a red sky, which is the longer wavelength of light, all around, we would need a much thicker atmosphere, in which case it's dubious whether any light would get through at all, or an atmosphere rich in compounds which preferentially absorb blue light. It is actually thought, I believe, that Titan may have a red sky due to the high concentration of more or less complex hydrocarbons which are photochemically generated in its atmosphere. But we've got some anomalies here. We've got a picture of the colour calibration chart, which is on the Spirit lander taken on Earth. So we've got these coloured panels. We've got a blue, an orange, a green and a brown, and we've got this clip here which is also blue. So now on Mars we've got the pictures coming back which show this colour calibration chart, and this blue panel has changed to red. So blue has become red. Now I can actually demonstrate to you that if you shine red light onto blue paper, if we're on Mars and the sky is red, we're getting red light coming through into our eyes, and we had a white piece of paper, it would show up red because red light is shone onto the paper from the Martian sky. But if you shine red light onto blue paper, you certainly don't get red light coming off blue paper, or whatever it is, whatever compound they've used, red paint, blue paint. It will come up black because blue light is blue paper reflects blue light, that's why it's blue. But red light doesn't have any blue in it, so if you shine red light onto blue paper, it will come out black, or at least a very dark colour, grey, or very sort of dark colour. So NASA is not altering colours then, this is the argument. Thanks for writing. The answer is that the colour chips on the sundial have different colours in the near-infrared range of PanCam filters. For example, the blue chip is dark near 600 nanometers, where humans see red light, but it is especially bright at 750 nanometers, which is used as red for many PanCam images, so it appears pink in RGB composites. We chose those pigments for the chips on purpose this way so we could provide different patterns of brightness regardless of which filters we used. The details of the colours of the pigments are published in a paper I wrote in December issue of the journal Geophysical Research (Planets), in case you want more details. All of us tired folks on the team are really happy that so many people around the world are following the mission and sending their support and encouragement. Thanks, Jim Bell, Cornell University. So what he's basically saying in that text is that they chose particular coloured filters for these little panels so that they would reflect in the blue part of the spectrum quite strongly. But this, what they do is they substitute the colours in the images because they want to enhance infrared emissions and this sort of thing. So they basically mess around with the image so that they can get more data out of it in terms of composition of the air and the rocks and this sort of thing. That's their argument. However, question I'd pose at this point is, did they also choose a particular pigment for the connector clips, which is shown here? Because this also appears to be red. Red has turned, blue has turned red on Mars. And my particular comment in all of that, they can say what they like, but my particular comment would be summed up by, well, who other than Electric Light Orchestra.
Mr. Blue Sky, please tell us why you had to hide away for so long. Where did we go wrong? Mr. Blue Sky, please tell us why you had to hide away for so long. Where did we go wrong?
Okay, there's another sort of thread to the colour issue on these images. Now I'd like to do an image comparison of images of the Gusev crater. And we've got two images here. Those from Mars Global Surveyor and those from Mars Express, which are basically doing a similar job. The Gusev crater is actually the region where the Spirit rover has landed. It's somewhere in this circle here, this ellipse rather. So these images seem to support Hoagland's claim that either NASA images have been filtered and or camera equipment has been designed deliberately to be insensitive to the detection of chlorophyll, which is the compound responsible for photosynthesis in plants. Now, I was reading something about this. I haven't included it in the presentation because I can't put everything in. But if you look at the design of the camera on some of the NASA Mars probes, they actually seem to have chosen particular features or CCD properties or whatever there is on it, which make it less sensitive to chlorophyll, which of course is the what is used in plants to photosynthesize. And I think that image that image comparison speaks volumes. actually. You know, I mean, that could be mineral deposits in the Mars Express image, but it certainly gives you more information and makes you ask more questions than the image on the right. So we've got some more image artifacts now from some of the rover pictures. What causes the colour bleeding effects on this photo? We can see here, this is one of the lander images. Why is this colour bleeding here? I mean, this is very strange. I mean, we can see some blue in this image here. We've got all these little artifacts here. If you look at this image, it's actually quite unusual. It really is. You know, it's just very strange, and there's lots. If you compare it with the images that are on Earth, there's lots of colour changes. Now, the next thing to have a look at, and let's have a closer look at this region here, and this is directly from a NASA image. It's on the JPL website. You can get it, no problem. Let's just have a look. I think this image has been doctored. You can see here, just at the edge of the lander, we've got this something here. I sharpened it up, and if you look at the surrounding pattern of pixels, you can see here that this has all come out quite clearly. You know, if we look at this region here, but for some reason here, we've got this smear in the image, and it's become indistinct, and it looks like whatever was there has been obscured or changed. That's in an official image. So we're getting slightly more controversial, but now I think you're going to say, well, you've definitely gone mad because of what's in this image. This is perhaps even more controversial. Now, this is a Pathfinder image from 1997. Again, it's available on Malin Space Science Systems websites and NASA data, as I keep saying. Can't see much there, can you? So let's have a closer look. Can't see it, can you? Well, can you see it yet? Still can't see it? No. Okay. So what's that? Bizarrely, it's a sphinx. Maybe difficult to see, but you can see here the paws, the body here. These are thought to be temples, and this thing here, the headdress, and you can see a bit of the sort of the haunches here as well. When you look at this for a few minutes, more of it comes out. You might think it's bizarre. It is there. It's a NASA image. It's in NASA data. You can look at the analysis on Enterprise mission and see what you make of it. It's up to you. That, to me, is what they say it is. It is a sphinx. An artificial structure, just like the other ones. Now, as you know, I've been involved with the Disclosure Project, and I became interested in the Mars anomalies a while ago. I've always been interested in the face, and I've followed some of it, but I became very interested, and my interest was renewed by the Disclosure Project's testimony. AH is an anonymous witness. He is a person who has gained significant information from inside the UFO and extraterrestrial groups within the US government, military and civilian companies. He has friends at the NSA, the CIA, NASA, JPL, the ONI, the National Reconnaissance Office and Area 51, the Air Force, Northrop, Boeing and others. He used to work at Boeing as a surface technician. I have another contact in NASA, AH says, JPL, that I haven't mentioned. I can't mention too much about it because he is still working there. This person that I know is very high up in NASA. He said they know it's a face. They know it was carved by somebody other than us. In an imaging area, they know for a fact that the face on Mars is real and that it was not made by windstorms or trick of lighting or anything like that. They know for a fact that the face on Mars was made by an extraterrestrial race that came here to the Earth about 45,000 years BC. Okay, so that's what this witness says. Believe it or disbelieve it, it's up to you. So I now really want to move on to this idea that it's certainly not new. There are many people that have said it for quite a number of years, possibly even before these pictures all came out, that there is a connection between pyramids on Earth and Mars. So now that we've established a possible and mind-boggling link between the Mars and the pyramids, let's talk a bit more about them. And much has been written and speculated about the origin and use of the pyramids, and I think there's a lot which isn't really clear. You know, there's a lot of conjecture and a lot of mixed views, etc. But one thing I think is clear: they do seem to have been used as burial chambers for certain of the pharaohs, and I think that's what we're all taught at school, that, you know, we had these rich kings, you know, and they built the pyramids as burial chambers, and they put them inside, and they were given their possessions and buried with their possessions, and they, you know, then would carry those possessions into the afterlife. And it was the burial chamber was situated in a particular place in the pyramids for you know, preservation of the bodies and this sort of thing, you know, and it's all couched in those sort of terms. However, there is an unusual coincidence when you study the pyramids. If you look at the some of the dimensions, there is a relationship between the radius of the Earth and the radius of the Moon to the dimensions of the pyramids. The other thing which I also checked out, and this was popularised by Graham Hancock initially, was that well, I'll say that in a minute, but it's true that the pyramids have been constructed in a precise and deliberate way, and their positions on the ground appear to show a relationship to, for instance, the stars in the constellation of Orion. Okay. Now, I attempted to verify this myself using Redshift to show that the positions of the stars in Orion and overlay them on top of an aerial view of the pyramids. Okay, so I got this aerial view of Giza pyramids off the internet, and then I used Redshift to look at the constellation of Orion, and then I superimposed the image one on top of the other, and I just had to enlarge it slightly to get it to fit, and I rotated the image slightly by about 2 or 3 degrees from the orientation in the sky. Now, notice the relationship between the star's brightnesses and the size of the corresponding pyramid. The larger the magnitude, the less bright the star is. So this one at the top has magnitude 2.25, which actually means it's less bright, it's dimmer, than this one, which is magnitude 1.69, and this one, which is 1.74. So that's the brightest, that's less bright, and that one is the dimmest. So we've got these 3 stars whose brightnesses are in relation to the size of these pyramids. And also, these stars align almost perfectly with the tops of the centres. Something is going on with that relationship. That is significant. Other people have made a lot more of it than me, and I think justifiably so. Now, we then just sort of go off on another slight tangent. So what was the pyramid for? Well, Christopher Dunn, an aerospace engineer, has suggested after 20 years of research that the Giza pyramid, as well as being a burial chamber, was once used as a power plant. Okay? But where did it get its energy from, though? He's actually... I haven't read the book, but I've got some audio by him where he explains a bit about his theory. He thinks it's a power plant. But where did it get its energy from? Well, let's hear him talking about it first.
The features within the Great Pyramid, as I started to study the pyramid and reviewing all other theories, the Great Pyramid seemed to have gotten the most attention, mainly because it's the largest, it's the most precise, it has the most unusual interior characteristics or architecture, and they are indeed extremely significant. And if you consider anything to be a smoking gun of an advanced civilization, the Great Pyramid is one. But I think that we have, over the centuries, become so used to the Great Pyramid being there that we have tended to cram it into a time period, or we have a concept of a culture that constructed the Great Pyramid that was not very advanced technologically. But if this Great Pyramid was suddenly discovered in today's society, and we had the different group of people actually looking at this structure. In other words, if we had scientists, physicists, engineers, acoustic engineers, all different disciplines looking at this particular structure that was just now discovered, we would be getting a totally different story out of this Great Pyramid, hopefully.
Your theory that those handles that were in the shaft on the so-called door, as some have said, were handles to open up the door. You say that they were almost electrodes or parts of a copper cable. And that, I think, was the basis for your theory, and it's probably the most revolutionary of anything I've heard so far.
The power plant hypothesis has always described these shafts as being conduits, if you will, for a chemical or a fluid feeding into the Queen's chamber. And even in 1993, as I saw Gantenbrink's exploration of the southern shaft. And so when the Upuaut 2 came to the end of the shaft and there were two copper fittings there, I was sitting with a friend of mine, Jeff Summers, in his living room watching this exploration, and he commented, well, they look like electrodes. And my response was, bingo, you know, it's just like we both hit it right at the same time, that they look like electrodes. And it really made sense to me because I had been involved in fluid switches. I know how they work, and basically the need to have them there became immediately obvious, because in order to feed the chemical into the chamber, you would need to know what the head pressure was on the column of chemical or the fluid.
Right.
And so the shaft would have to be full at all times in order to dictate what the feed rate would be into the chamber. And that is why they would need a feedback mechanism, so that when the shaft was filled with this chemical, which I predicted was, I speculate is dilutes a hydrochloric acid solution, that there would be a connection, there would be electron flow between the anode and the cathode, and then when the fluid level dropped, that would signal for more solution to be fed into the shaft.
Are you saying, though, that the Great Pyramid was a huge battery?
No, actually, it's a lot more sophisticated than a battery. The solutions feeding into the chamber, I theorize, actually combined to create hydrogen, and the hydrogen was critical. It was crucial to the operation of the power plant. And so everything in the Great Pyramid actually comes together into a very cohesive unit. One piece of the Great Pyramid, which could be at a totally different part of the Great Pyramid, has a connection to every other part. In other words, the southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber is connected in some way and has a purpose to the function of the northern shaft in the King's Chamber, or the 5 overlaying layers of granite on top of the King's Chamber.
And do you believe later, Christopher, maybe thousands and thousands of years later, the Egyptians then used the pyramid as possible tombs, probably not even knowing what the original intent was? Is that possible?
Well, it is a fact that that most pyramids where mummies have been found, that they found that the mummies were actually interred there thousands of years after the pyramid was built.
So Dunn's analysis seems to indicate that the pyramid may have been constructed to resonate with energy fields in the environment to generate microwave energy. And you also mentioned hydrogen there as well, but I don't really have time to go into the details of that, and I haven't really studied it myself well enough to explain it either. But just suffice it to say that there is evidence, whether you kind of interpret it the way that Christopher Dunn does, obviously you'd have to look at the evidence first, that the pyramid wasn't just a burial chamber. It was something more than that. Definitely, yes, it was a burial chamber, but that wasn't its only purpose. And I shall come on to why I think this is important in this picture next. If the pyramid was some kind of power plant, where was it getting its energy from? It wasn't a hydroelectric plant, it wasn't a nuclear plant, because if it was, it would be radioactive. It wasn't a hydroelectric plant because although it was not far from the Nile, it didn't have any water flowing through it. That would have been discovered. So where was it getting its energy from? What was it burning, or what was it doing to make energy or provide energy? Well, one theory is that it's something called hyperdimensional energy. Okay, now this is a fairly new concept to me, and probably to you as well. And there's actually a line of thinking which says that the pyramid has particular properties which allow it to exploit this hyperdimensional energy, which we're now going to talk about. But first, before we talk about hyperdimensional energy, we have to define really what a hyperdimension is. So what is a hyperdimension? So how do we describe that? Well, isn't it just a lot of Star Trek techno-babble, mumbo-jumbo sci-fi nonsense? No, certainly not. Even string theory mentions higher or hyperdimensions. And here's our friend, Professor Brian Greene.
Our whole universe is living on a membrane inside a much larger, higher dimensional space. It's almost as if we were living inside a loaf of bread. Our universe might be like a slice of bread, just one slice in a much larger loaf that physicists sometimes call the bulk. And if these ideas are right, the bulk may have other slices, other universes that are right next to ours, in effect, parallel universes. Not only would our universe be nothing special, but we could have a lot of neighbors. Some of them could resemble our universe. They might have matter and planets and, who knows, maybe even beings of a sort. Others could certainly be a lot stranger. They might be ruled by completely different laws of physics. Now, all of these other universes would exist within the extra dimensions of M-theory, dimensions that are all around us. Some even say they might be right next to us, less than a millimeter away. But if that's true, why can't I see them or touch them?
If you have a brain living in a higher dimensional space and your particles, your atoms, cannot get off the brain, it's like trying to reach out, but you can't touch anything. It might as well be on the other end of the universe.
And it's a very powerful idea, because if it's right, it means that our whole picture of the universe is clouded by the fact that we're trapped on just a tiny slice of the higher dimensional universe.
Okay, so to try and sort of explore the concept of a hyperdimension a bit more, I've got a little illustration. It's difficult to get a clear picture or description of what hyperspace is and the way that higher dimensions are conceptualized. You know, how do we actually get a grasp and get a handle on it? Well, one such description is shown here, and this shows how we derive our 3 dimensions from a single point and how we can extend it from 3 to 4 dimensions. We go from a point to a line to a square to a cube and then to a tesseract or hypercube. Okay. So we start with the empty set, which is said to have dimension -1. So we start with a point whose dimension is 0. Then we trace from a point from one position to another along a straight line. We shall get a segment whose dimension is 1. From a segment we can obtain a square, translate the segment in the perpendicular direction while tracing its endpoints. The square has dimension 2. and then we trace out and we get a cube. So you can see how we extend from a point to a line to a square to a cube, and then we extend into 4 dimensions to give. But there are other ways of describing a hypercube as well. There's some more diagrams on this page which may be instructive. So we draw out the square into a cube, and then we draw out the cube into 4 dimensions, and then we can see various projections back from 4 dimensions into 3, and we get these various shapes appearing where we've got like one cube superimposed on another, and we can see this cube within a cube, and this is a tesseract or hypercube, or one projection of it. So we can see in 2 dimensions, for instance, this is the unfolding of a 3-dimensional cube into 2 dimensions, and this is in the unfolding into 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional cube. So you can begin to get an idea of the concept from these sorts of pictures. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it's just a way of conceptualizing what I'm talking about. We can conceptualize and work with ideas which are outside our physical dimension. Okay, so we're now going to try and tie some of these topics together. What Richard Hoagland has done, along with other people, is they've basically looked at Cydonia for quite a long time, and they're not just saying it's artificial. They're saying they're actually giving a reason as to why it is where it is, what was happening there, and what it was for. And this is where we get into this a bit more. So Richard Hoagland and later David Wilcock have developed something they call hyperdimensional physics. It's not just them. I mean, there's been various versions of this, but they've kind of put together a coherent model which I've been looking at. And they postulate that this explains both certain features of planets and changes which are going on in the solar system. And this is all interrelated to what they say happened on Mars thousands of years ago with this civilization that was there. The changes that they describe in the solar system have been documented over the years by NASA and other observational bodies. And again, all of these changes are discussed at enterprisemission.com. And one of the common themes in their analysis are repeated angles of 19.5 degrees and 120 degrees, which we'll look at a bit more in a minute. But we've got another sound clip here to listen to first.
When we tripped over the Cydonia problem, decades ago now, 2 decades ago, and tried to unravel, if it was real, and then what did it mean, one of the key things that I figured out with the help of Errol Turin and some other folks is that there appeared to be a message left in the ruins of an ancient Martian civilization at a place called Cydonia on Mars. And that message had to do with the underpinnings of reality, how physics really works, what relates us as conscious beings on this planet to stars, the galaxy, energy processes, possible technologies that don't use oil, the whole 9 yards appeared to be in those geometric formation. What we then discovered was this geometry was not just any old geometry, but appeared to be a geometry that was the underpinnings of physics in the 19th century. And that physics talked not about quantas and, zero-point energy and things that go bump in the night that can't be measured, like, Einstein number of dimensions that can never be tested. It talked about higher dimensions that could be tested, where energy could flow from higher dimensions into our dimension and literally create all of the reality that we see. The same geometry that mathematicians and physicists were working with, leading to higher dimensional possibilities, people like Riemann back in the 19th century, is the same geometry we found apparently encoded in the set of ruins on the planet Mars. That's why I have said for a long time, Art, that I would be willing to bet anybody anything that this is real.
David, how do you fit into this at this point? I mean, where do you fit in here?
Well, here's a kid 19 years old who reads Monuments of Mars and has his world completely turned upside down because everything that he'd taken to be reality is suddenly called into question. There is a series of relationships between clearly artificial monuments on the Cydonia Plateau,
Right.
which demonstrate angular relationships, certain specific angles such as 19.5 degrees, and those angles correspond to a particular form of geometry. So I spent years and years of my life with, at the forefront of my mind, Hoagland's model.
Something that anybody can demonstrate to themselves, and that is that at about the 19.5 degree point on either side of center of a planet, you can observe very unusual things, evidence of energy within the planets at that 19.5 degree point. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
Goes off, you find the largest energy upwelling on these planets at 19.5 degrees.
Which is this hyperdimensional point that you're always telling us about, and you believe a source of energy for not just our planet but all planets.
Well,
right?
it wasn't a matter of belief. It was when we saw this geometry, this pattern. Remember, all science starts with just seeing a pattern.
Yes.
Then we started asking questions of people that I knew, experts in various fields. What did this pattern mean? Did anybody ever notice this pattern anywhere before? And it was my friend Stan Tenen at the Mayru Foundation, you know, who's been working on biblical texts for years and years and years, who said, oh, that pattern is found in Coxeter and several other eminent mathematicians, and it relates to hyperdimensional models of higher state spaces, higher realities that cannot be seen or touched or tasted, but can be modeled mathematically as an abstract theory.
Is showing that the entire solar system, not just at any one point like 19.5, but the planets themselves, and in many cases their moons, are showing dramatic signs of energetic increase, which include increasing atmospheric pressure, increasing brightness from the aurora borealis, increasing magnetic field strength, increasing cataclysmic activity in many cases. And I can stand here tonight and basically say to you, name a planet, and I'll tell you what's changing about it. The irony is that all of this data is being released with conventional sounding explanations.
All right. What would be a conventional sounding explanation for global warming on Mars? I'd be very interested in that.
It has to do with the ice caps, the regions that are at the poles being tilted more towards the sun, and they claim that because that's going on, that it warms up the planet and melts the ice caps. Which
and they are melting, aren't they? They are melting, right?
Oh, dramatically so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the problem is that the time scales don't fit.
Okay, so that's a bit of background on the some of the things that are happening in the solar system and the hyperdimensional model. It is sort of quite difficult to present in a short space of time, but I'll try and cover some of the sort of important features. He mentioned there this idea of the angles of 19.5 degrees and 120 degrees, which I'm going to talk about a bit more. After that, we'll look at changes in the solar system. Now, if you can just imagine for a minute, we have two pyramids. And these are triangular pyramids, not four-sided pyramids, with a triangular base. And they are superimposed inside a sphere so that the points of the base of the pyramid touch the inner edges of the sphere. If that is the case, and these are all equilateral angles, then if we take the equator as 0 degrees, which is what's in our geographical model, and then we look at the angle which the angle of latitude which these points of the tetrahedron touch the sphere, we find that it's a latitude of about 19.5 degrees, 19.47 is what it actually turns out as. So the red lines show a pyramid on a triangular base, a tetrahedral bounded by a sphere. Okay, point A is 120 degrees longitude from point B, which is 1/3 of the distance around the globe, because we've got 3 points on the base of the pyramid touching the inner edges of the sphere, if you can imagine that. So that's basically the simple argument as to why these angles are important. So let's have a look now at some of these changes which are going on in the solar system and why they're important. We'll start off with the Sun. Since at least the late 1970s, the Sun's overall radiation emissions have increased by 0.5% per decade. It's chucking out more radiation into space. That's quite a significant increase as well. Another NASA scientist has found that between 1901 and 2000, the Sun's magnetic field has increased in strength by 230%. I'm not quite sure how that's measured, but that is a NASA figure. Before 2003, the two strongest solar flares on record were rated at a previously unheard of X20. It's just a scale that they use for rating them, and occurred in 1989 and 2001. Then, in November 2003, a flare occurred that some estimate to be at least 200% more powerful than any ever seen before, an X40 class solar flare. And here we have some pictures of that event, which was on the 5th of November 2003. This animation is just showing some of the images from SOHO. Now, these and other events in late 2003 caused one NASA scientist to say that the Sun is now more active than in living memory, and there's been nothing like this before. NASA statement. During the sunspot cycle, when activity is at a maximum, many of the spots appear to be at a latitude of 19.5 degrees from the Sun's equator, that is. And Mercury. I've got some Mariner 10 pictures here. Despite huge surface temperatures, Mercury seems to have ice in its polar regions. And this is shown here. This is blamed on comet-based ice that crash-landed into permanently shadowed craters, which NASA scientists admit is problematic, a problematic assumption to make. The ice supposedly has survived for millennia, whereas a NASA probe landing at the pole is only expected to survive for 1 week in the heat. Mercury also has an unexpectedly dense core of iron, consisting of almost half of its entire mass, and a strong dipole magnetic field as well. Some scientists would like to know how these anomalies are possible. Okay, so next we'll look at Venus. The amount of sulfur in Venus's atmosphere was found to have decreased dramatically between 1978 and 1983, and this is currently blamed on a hypothetical giant volcanic eruption which released these sulfur compounds all at once into the Venusian atmosphere around well, sometime in the past, basically around 1978, and then this sulfur then settled out of the Venusian atmosphere and so disappeared, so it kind of dissipated. No real explanation. Another factor, Venus's overall night-side air glow brightness has increased by 2,500% in roughly the same time frame, 1975 to 2001. So this dark area here is actually the night-side glow that's not getting the sun, and it's that's increased. So it seems to be radiating more glow on the dark side away from the sun. The new air glow is green in colour, indicating oxygen atoms, and these oxygen emissions are as strong on Venus as they are in Earth's own oxygen-rich aurora. So a possible explanation is that there has been a massive increase in the oxygen content of Venus's atmosphere. Now, just to clarify this is showing that there's been changes, huge changes in the composition of the atmosphere. So this just doesn't happen according to standard models. So what is going on? You don't just get oxygen being created in huge quantities or sulfur decreasing in huge quantities over the sort of 5 and 10 year periods or 20-year periods that we're talking about here. It just doesn't happen according to the current models that we use. Now, the other note with this is that Alpha and Beta Regio, two active volcanoes on Venus, are at a latitude of 19.5 degrees. So all NASA data, you can go and check this out. Okay, so what's been happening on the Earth? Well, 410% increase in the overall number of natural catastrophes on Earth between 1963 and 1993. There's been a 400% increase in the number of quakes on Earth, over 2.5 on the Richter scale that is, since 1973. There's approximately a 500% increase in the Earth's volcanic activity between 1875 and 1993. 9 out of the 21 most severe earthquakes from 856 to 1999 AD have occurred in the 20th century. And one suggestion I'm making, which I heard Richard Hoagland briefly mention, is that new forms of lightning have been observed in the atmosphere. Sprites, jets, and what's been called mega lightning. And these have been observed for the first time in the late 80s and early 90s. So here we have some film. So you can see the jets there. And then we have a red sprite. So we see these new forms of lightning that have appeared. So we now go on to have a look at some of the things that have been happening on Mars. Now, the polar ice caps have diminished significantly in size in the last 8 years. And I mean, look at this. You can plainly see this here. From October 1996 to March 1997, and that is a massive decrease in the size of the polar ice caps. And these are Hubble images, space telescope. Now, interestingly, NASA has admitted earlier that an underlying geometric structure was somehow involved in the retreat of the ice cap, which I'll highlight in a minute. Now, hexagon-shaped pattern seems to be present in both images. It's perhaps somewhat tenuous, but I think it is there. I just wondered myself if it could be an artifact of the way that these images have been joined together, because I think some of these are like mosaic images which have been joined together. But you can definitely see this. Another note about Mars is that Olympus Mons, which is the 27-kilometre high volcano, is at 19 degrees north on the Martian planet. So we can see this sort of hexagonal structure here, and I think possibly you can see it here as well, which Hoagland says is one of the effects of this hyperdimensional energy which is being pumped into these planetary systems. Now, ozone on Mars is up and dust is down, both indicating that increased ionisation is taking place, which is a sign of energetic bleed-through in the HD model. So he's basically saying that this hyperdimensional energy is sort of flowing into Mars. The atmosphere is noticeably cloudier and denser, and a massive hurricane and a surprisingly fast-moving planet-wide dust storm have also been seen. So we have that here. So here's the dust storm. And here is the hurricane you can see there at the top and an enlargement here. So we've had a hurricane on Mars which has happened in 1997. So a sign of more energetic weather, which I suppose reminds us somewhere else that's been having energetic weather. Take a look at Jupiter. Hoagland observes that Jupiter's great red spot, which is present for at least the last 300 years, is found at a latitude of 19.5 degrees. And recently there has been new storm centres forming and others have disappeared, and NASA does not really have a good explanation for this. It also is said that Jupiter is undergoing global warming. And here we have a press release about this. Researcher predicts global climate change on Jupiter as giant planets spots disappear. So we have an article about that there. The amount of heavy elements such as oxygen in Jupiter's atmosphere decreased by 10% between 1979 and 1995, which is equivalent to 20 Earth masses of oxygen disappearing in 16 years. Radiation emissions from Jupiter simultaneously increased by about 25%. So it seems that there's been a transmutation of mass into energy, or something like that. So here we see a picture of these storms merging as well. And there are also changes in the Jovian satellite system, and that there's much more information on this in Enterprise mission. A new storm centre formed in a few days, as shown by this Cassini movie from 2000. As Cassini flew out towards Saturn, it actually had an ongoing mission to photograph Jupiter, and this is shown in the right quarter of this video. So you can see here a new storm centre is formed in this area here. There, and there's also probably another one that you can see. So there's quite a lot going on in Jupiter's atmosphere. But why should this suddenly form? There's one here as well. One forms here as well. And so we move out to Saturn. Between 1980 and 1996, the speed of rotation for Saturn's clouds at the equator reduced by 58.2%, described as an unexpected and dramatic change in weather. The NASA explanation is seasonal changes. In August 1981, Voyager 2 reached Saturn and photographed unexpected spokes in the rings caused by bunching of particles, which can be seen here. In December 2003, with higher resolution and superior imaging, it was hoped to get a better look at these spokes with Cassini. The spokes had disappeared. Saturn has also exhibited anomalous X-ray emissions observed by the Chandra satellite, and it's also had increased auroral activity. Now again we can see this hexagonal structure here, if I trace it out, in the clouds, which has been mentioned here. And here too you can see a sort of hexagonal structure in the clouds here, which is again, according to Hoagland, is an indicator of this hyperdimensional model. So we move on out to Uranus. Uranus has appeared as featureless as a cue ball in 1986 when Voyager flew by. Remarkably, bright clouds began appearing as of at least 1996, clouds almost as large as continents on Earth. By 1998, the Hubble Space Telescope had discovered nearly as many clouds in the high Uranian atmosphere as had ever been observed in the entire history of Uranus. One of these clouds was brighter than any other ever seen on Uranus, and you can see some of these here, and some of them shown in this little video here. In 1999, NASA articles were referring to Uranus as being hit by huge storms, making it a dynamic world with the brightest clouds in the outer solar system. The head NASA scientist referred to these increasingly bright active clouds as really big changes on Uranus compared to what he had seen with Voyager. Again, an indication of apparent energy flowing into Uranus and its weather system. Even from Earth, significant changes have been catalogued based on new cloud patterns whose origins are, quote, not well understood. And we continue our trip through the solar system and look at Neptune. By 1994, Neptune's great dark spot, which was photographed by Voyager in 1989, Voyager 2, it had a dark spot, and it was at 19.5 degrees. This image here is somewhat modified to show the spot. It doesn't. This isn't meant to show the whole planet. It's just a selection of it. By April of 1995, Neptune's Great Dark Spot had reappeared in Neptune's northern hemisphere, accompanied by more bright high-altitude clouds. NASA itself noted that this new spot was a near mirror image of the first spot previously imaged by Voyager 2. More bright clouds have appeared in the last 8 years. Here we've got that fairly clearly illustrated, I think you'll agree. 1996, not much happening. 1998, we can see a bit here happening. 2002, well, quite a difference. All Hubble Space Telescope images. Okay, so we move on to Pluto. Most distant planet, which some say is not even really a planet. We naturally assume that if a planet moves closer to the Sun, it is exposed to more heat. Since 1989, Pluto has been moving away from the Sun in its highly elliptical 248-year orbit. Space.com admits that logic suggests the planet might cool as it receives less sunlight each day. In other words, as it goes further away from the Sun, it cools down. Makes sense, doesn't it? Dr. James L. Elliott took advantage of a rare event where Pluto passed in front of a star in 2002, and this allowed him to determine whether Pluto's structure and composition had stayed the same as in 1989, similar to what is shown on the right. They discovered that the atmospheric pressure of Pluto has increased by 300% between 1989 and 2002, and this has caused a noticeable rise in Pluto's surface temperatures, even while it's receding from the Sun. This is attributed by mainstream planetologists to what is called seasonal change. Okay, so based on our current accepted understanding, we have looked at changes appearing throughout the solar system that appear to be anomalous. We don't know why they're happening. They're just given as seasonal changes. Hoagland's analysis is based on real NASA data. All of this is NASA data. You can go into the websites and books and tables and check it out for yourself. In short, there seems to be an influx from somewhere of energy into the solar system, which modern physics does not really explain. We've got the planet seemingly charging up somehow. The weather system is getting more energetic, more radiation coming out of the Sun, more energy in the Jovian system, in its weather systems changing and moving about. Mars polar caps melting. And Hoagland calls it this hyperdimensional energy. And could another name for it be ether energy or 0 point energy, which is what I'd like to link into next.
Gene, I don't think cold fusion is fusion at all. I think it is something different, something more fundamental, something revolutionary, something potentially hyperdimensional, something that is transmitted from another dimension and appears in our dimension as an anomalous energy source under certain conditions.
So Richard Hoagland is saying that some of this hyperdimensional energy has manifested itself in things like cold fusion. So could it just be like 0 point energy or ether energy? An equivalent of hyperdimension was actually considered as part of James Clerk Maxwell's original equations in the 19th century, but it was discarded with the oversimplification by Oliver Heaviside and William Gibbs. Now, James Clerk Maxwell and his equations actually underpin most of the electromagnetic theory in modern physics. So all the electronics devices that you use and we rely on, such as I'm using now, have been developed as a result of an understanding of Maxwell's equations. However, his original equations were actually chopped in half, and the portion which included reference to hyperdimensions, which went under a different name, was actually left out in the early 20th century. And this man, Eugene Malov, talks a bit more about that. He believed that current physics based on quantum mechanics and relativity, which is what it is based on, and of course we heard a bit about string theory, is almost completely wrong. and he had been working with other rebel scientists since the early 1990s to try to develop cold fusion and other free energy technologies for general use.
And Dr. Paulo and Alexandra Correa have in their laboratory done many further experiments to clarify some of the many, many confusions that Reich himself had about this. They have established the irrefutable presence of an ether, a mass-free ether that can be analyzed with thermometers, electroscopes, which shows that it is possible to make little motors that work on it. Earlier, they had this patented technology that I referred to called the PAGD, which has 3 U.S. patents, 1 Israel patent, and so forth, that have pulses occurring in vacuum between aluminum plates in a glass cylinder and produce more energy out than in.
Would you say that this ether is a normal occurrence in the universe?
It is,
and it's a natural thing?
It's the foundation of the universe. There is no other foundation of the universe. The myth of relativity, and relativity is wrong, it is incorrect. Indeed, its equations describe certain experiments, accelerator experiments, very accurately. There's no doubt about that.
An outcome, I guess, right?
But the theory can be wrong. In other words, an equation can give you a very precise match between an experimental result in an accelerator, as an example, and the theory. But that does not mean that the theory is fundamentally correct. In fact, it is fundamentally absolutely wrong. There is no such thing as non-simultaneity and so forth. It's all, unfortunately, a myth. As far as advanced spaceflight, we'll seriously have to revise the Starflight Handbook someday.
And what does it do in terms of speed, Eugene?
There's no limitation on speed. The myth of no massful object could go faster than the speed of light is just that. It's a myth. It's observed in accelerators that you have to put more and more energy in to accelerate electrons. There's no doubt about that, okay? And you do reach a limitation if you're accelerating electrons with the kind of a way they do it in accelerators. But fundamentally, there is no limit for a spaceship made out of mass, okay, namely us or a rocket ship, to go as fast as we would ever particularly want it to go.
Well,
there's another myth of relativity. The twin paradox is also a myth, okay? It is just wrong. The time dilation is not part of the universe. It just isn't. No matter how many times they will tell you about muons changing their decay patterns coming through the atmosphere and so forth, and this proves supposedly time dilation, they can say it as long as they want, but there is no such thing. Now listen, since there's no such thing as space-time, which is this combined entity that came out of special relativity, there can be no such thing as a warped space-time that gives you black holes or gives you a singularity such as Stephen Hawking talks about or others in cosmology talk about. This has gotten into complete megalomania and insanity. But let me tell you, the joke, the cosmic joke of all time is on late 20th century and early 21st century modern physics, because history will record that they went off on a tangent with relativity and special and general, and they completely fooled themselves, while at the very same time making fun of such things that were giving them a hint as to the alternate physics, namely low-energy nuclear reactions, ether energy, what Reich came up with. These people ought to go back to Science 101. Science 101 is this: experiment always overrules theory.
So Eugene Mallov there speaking quite candidly about his opinions about ether energy, or this, that's another name for hyperdimensional energy. And Eugene Mallov knew Richard Hoagland. Eugene Mallov was the president of the non-profit New Energy Foundation Incorporated, and he held a Master of Science degree and a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical and Astronautical Engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a Science Doctorate in Environmental Sciences from Harvard University. He worked for high technology engineering companies such as Hughes Research Laboratories, TASC, the Analytical Science Corporation, and MIT Lincoln Laboratory. He was chief science writer at the MIT News Office when cold fusion erupted, and he actually ended up resigning from that post when he found out that MIT had themselves replicated positive results about cold fusion, but then had changed their report, deliberately concealing the fact that they had had a positive result. He found out about that and ended up resigning. Dr. Malov was murdered on the 17th of May 2004. So we now reached the end of this presentation. Perhaps I'm mistaken, and much of the evidence here I've presented, or in fact not the evidence itself, but the interpretation of it is not valid. NASA is not doing anything untoward, which is the standard view. Mars has a red sky. The anomalies are all just natural features which we are perceiving as something else, pareidolia or sand dunes, have it which way you want. Changes in the solar system have nothing to do with the hyperdimensional model. They are just seasonal changes and a combination of other effects which are not fully understood. There is no link between other anomalies and artifacts on Mars, Cydonia, Egypt and solar system changes, because there are no artifacts anyway. So that's one summary that you can draw from all this. In other words, that nothing here is particularly important. But if I'm right, I would say it's worth considering that our natural biorhythm cycle has a length of 25 hours, which is close to that of the Martian day. Mars has or had an advanced civilization which built cities as large as many on Earth, and they built underground structures. Something happened on Mars, and some of the people came here and either influenced us in building our own pyramids and similar structures, or they built them themselves. Hyperdimensional is present and is affecting all planets in the solar system, including the Earth. Now, just as a closing thought here, we'll go for one of these quotes that you come across from time to time. And it was Winston Churchill who said that man will occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of the time he will pick himself up and continue. Finally, well, I'd like to just go back to something I mentioned earlier about the molar data. We've got a video here which is some renderings done by Kees Venenbos, who's a Dutch guy, and he's got a website there. And he used the original NASA data from the Mars Orbiter Laser Altimeter on Mars Global Surveyor to produce some new images of Mars. And he added a bit of imagination, and so did I.